This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. Inequality is now on the agenda for the Republican Party, too. But labor lawyer and activist Tom Geoghegan says it's baloney. Political analyst Ed Kilgore says the fact that Marco Rubio is considered a moderate is about all anyone needs to know about the Republican Party. And Bill Press guest host Peter Ogburn and Meredith Shiner discuss presidential politics. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Labor lawyer Tom Geoghegan thinks the Republicans' faux populism is a good sign for Democrats because we own the issue. And we say hello to Thomas Geoghegan, graduate of Harvard Law School, labor lawyer that's represented labor unions and employee groups in many significant cases in various United States district courts and courts of appeals. And he is the author of the book, Only One Thing Can Save Us, Why Our Country Needs a New Kind of Labor Movement. Thomas Geoghegan, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Sure.
Always
glad
nice
to be here.
And it's always nice to have you with us. How does the virtual disappearance of organized labor affect the American economy as a whole? And doesn't labor's weakness simply elevate America's trading partners?
Well, those are two separate questions. So why don't I go with the first one first?
Sure.
How does the virtual disappearance of organized labor affect the American economy as a whole? Well, one thing, it requires people to go into debt to keep spending because there just isn't, and for two reasons. One is they don't get enough money at work, and the allocation of income is screwed. And you're really, if the country is to do well economically and get towards full employment, inevitably, in some way or another, whether it's college debt or housing debt or some kind of debt, people have to go into debt. And the second, and that creates bubbles of various kinds, and it collapses eventually. So you have this new kind of cycle that comes about. Right now, we're in a good phase because we're still paying down from the last fiscal collapse, but this will come back again. It's just built into the system when you don't have a fair distribution of compensation. The second way, well, there are many, many ways that it affects the American economy as a whole. Is that you don't have a trained workforce. You don't have unions that are constantly committed to skilling up people so that they can get more money in return. It creates a skills problem that exists here. And another bigger reason, I think, and this relates to the second question about our trade deficit. It's very hard to do much about the trade deficit without a labor movement, and it's not because, which is what the people who oppose TPP think, we've just got to raise wages and we have to have walls that keep out, blah, blah, blah. And there's a lot about TPP I don't like, but I'm not a protectionist, especially. And I think the bigger problem is that you don't have a labor movement that is able to influence investment in this country, partly by shrinking up the number of people who are there for debt, right? Because we have this huge unregulated financial sector which sucks in so much money that should be going into a more productive manufacturing sector. And you don't have a manufacturing sector that has a labor union as a partner, and I'm not just talking about co-determination European style, but it's just the complete absence of any worker voice in our corporations means that all sorts of investment goes into finance instead of the construction of durable goods, let's put it that way. And that means that we just have less because the profit levels are lower in manufacturing. So you have an unregulated financial sector with huge returns there. You have fewer returns in the manufacturing sector, and you don't have a labor movement that is able to work itself into corporate governance, if I may say so, in such a way to influence investment. And that's the difference. That's why countries that have higher wages run big trade surpluses and they have less protection than we do here. Mm-hmm. Whereas we have lower wages, sometimes more trade barriers, but we just don't. We run huge trade deficits, and I think that has a lot to do with the corporate model here, which excludes any kind of employee voice.
Now, you hinted to this just a moment ago, but I presume you oppose the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the TPP, as a blow to labor.
I do.
But what about the argument that American...
But not for the reasons labor does. I don't like these corporate governmental arbitration systems that impose rules on countries, and I just think it's undemocratic, and I'm very suspicious of it.
What about the argument? What about the argument that American working men and women need lower prices on products made abroad? Or do you think that's just hogwash excuse for the TPP?
That they need lower prices from products made abroad.
Right. In other words, the things that we're going to be bringing in cheaper product, I guess.
Well, I think actually you compete more on the basis of quality now than on price. So, most countries. The fundamental reason we're running a trade deficit is our investment patterns here in this country, which reward capital allocation into finance at the expense of manufacturing. That's what it comes down to. And trying to fix this with protectionist sort of remedies doesn't work. That doesn't mean I'm in favor of TPP. I don't think it's not going to lower tariff barriers in the same way that other treaties have in the past. The TPP, my understanding of it and my reading of it is that it's going to change governmental structures and change intellectual property rules and genetic modification of food and impose a sort of global standards when countries legitimately should have their own standards protecting their own products and intellectual products, agricultural and food products. But in terms of lowering the price of, we don't have many tariffs anymore in the old-fashioned way. So I think these are more restrictions in kind. But that said, I do think that I'm a little bit of an outlier here because I just don't think that I think labor is constantly betting on the wrong horse in trade dealings. Really, what we need to be doing is focusing on corporate governance and the way we make decisions in our investment here. The reason we have a trade deficit that is jaw-dropping, and other higher wage countries which are more exposed globally because they have bigger manufacturing sectors than we do, isn't because of tariffs or protectionist measures of one kind or another, and people better wake up to that.
Turning to politics, not that wasn't politics, of course, because it's all politics, but What do you make of the noises coming from some Republicans about raising the minimum wage and helping the working class move up?
Oh, well, it's baloney.
Smoke and mirrors?
Yeah, it's when Republicans get behind meaningful labor law reform, then I'll become a believer. But that's not even remotely going to happen. Although, here is one thing that is interesting. I do think the Republican Party could be about to break up. And there is, as repulsive and often racist and vitriolic as these old white guys are in the Republican Party, I do sense that there's a little bit of populist sentiment out there. Now, I'm not a subscriber with Ralph Nader of the idea that we can make common cause with populists on the right and so forth. I don't believe that at all. But I do think that the fact that there is this kind of, how should I call it, faux populism in the Republican Party is a sign that the Republican Party, which doesn't really function very well in serving that kind of populism, because it's ultimately controlled by the Bushes and the business interests, and not ultimately by the Freedom Caucus. It's a sign that the Republican Party isn't serving its own constituency, and that the inequality has gotten so bad that it's affecting everybody. And that's, you kind of hope for. If you're sometimes on your left, I don't believe in hoping for the worst in order for things to get better, but sometimes that is the result. And I do think it's, I feel very uneasy saying this, but I do think some of the Trump-related populism is a good sign for the Democrats, because the Republicans are indeed falling apart, and they're falling apart over an economic problem, namely inequality, that should be our issue. Can I put it that way?
Oh, yeah. Now, on the Democratic side, Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, or someone else, who should labor be supporting and why?
Oh, I'd rather not opine on that. I mean, I'm very fond of Bernie Sanders, and I think he's done a great thing in pushing the party to the left, and I'd just like to leave it at that.
Fair enough.
So,
hey, we got a little of that out of you anyway.
Yeah.
So,
no, I mean, I don't think it matters as much as other people do as to who is president. I think it matters much more on how much pressure you can apply to that person and how much pressure you can apply to other parts of the government to make it work. So let me put it this way. I'm strongly in favor of structure. I think structural solutions explain things. And as far as I'm concerned, although I have some, I like FDR and Woodrow Wilson and so on and so forth, but it's really they're products of their time and circumstances. And if you don't like the way Bill Clinton did things, it's partly because the left was weak. And if the left is strong, it doesn't particularly matter who's president. From the Democratic side, especially. I mean, I probably shouldn't say that, but that's how because there are lots of exceptions. You could have a real screwball, but assuming that there's a competent political person in charge, that political person in the White House or anywhere else is going to respond to the forces that ensure that person's reelection. If those forces are forces of the left, if the left is strong, then really, the bottom line is that the left just wants somebody in there who is A, competent at the job, able to get things done, and smart enough to realize that his or her interests are with labor. So the bigger thing is there a left movement that is strong enough to do that? And one of the reasons you support Bernie Sanders, I think, is to demonstrate that that's the case.
Okay. Thomas Geoghegan, graduate of Harvard Law School. He's a labor lawyer representing labor unions, employee groups, author of a book, Only One Thing Can Save Us, Why Our Country Needs a New Kind of Labor Movement. Thomas, thank you so much for your time with us today on americasdemocrats.org. We look forward to having you back again soon.
Sure. Thank you.
You're quite welcome. And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future and help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Ed Kilgore, a progressive political analyst, says Hillary Clinton looks to be in good shape for the nomination, despite some resistance from progressives. We'll talk to him more about that in just a moment. Right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
Back in 2008, Democratic Senator Dianne Feinstein declared, "There are parts of government that can be run like a business and should be run like a business." Thus, the chairwoman of the Senate committee overseeing congressional facilities privatized the restaurants and other food services in the U.S. Senate. Sure enough, those dining spots now turn a profit because they are being run like a business, specifically a business like McDonald's. Restaurant Associates, the New York outfit that got the House and Senate food contract, profits by paying poverty-level wages and generally mistreating the cooks, waitstaff, and other people who put the service in food service. Wages are less than $11 an hour, well below the very expensive cost of living in the Washington area. Everybody has second jobs, says one weary worker. And when our $174,000 a year members of Congress adjourn for the 3 months or so of vacations they take each year, the food service workers are sent away with no pay at all. I should note that Restaurant Associates did give a pay raise to some workers not long ago. It was 3 cents an hour. That's not a raise, it's an insult. I serve food to some of the most powerful people on earth, says a Senate cook. They often talk of expanded opportunity for workers, but most don't seem to notice or care that workers in their own building are struggling to survive. Care? A key Senate committee chairman, Representative Tom Graves, recently showed how much Congress cares about the inequality by refusing even to consider requiring food service contractors to pay a living wage. It's really not within the scope of this committee to micromanage all contracts, he sniffed. This is Jim Hightower saying, think of how that makes the Capitol dining staff feel. If I was old Tom, from now on I wouldn't eat anywhere in the Capitol without taking a food taster with me.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Political analyst Ed Kilgore says despite some progressives' disdain for Hillary Clinton, she's on course for the Democratic nomination and the White House.
And we say hello to Ed Kilgore, the political columnist at New York Magazine, longtime commentator on progressive politics, today on americasdemocrats.org. Ed, thank you so much for your time and joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Oh, I'm very delighted.
And happy to have you with us. You know, at the beginning of 2015, it really seemed a sure bet that the 2016 presidential nominees would have the familiar names of Clinton and Bush. How likely is that now?
Well, I'd say half of it is very, very likely. After some challenges and some concerns and a very strong initial showing in terms of support, money, and even in the polls by Bernie Sanders, I'd say Hillary Clinton is, again, the odds-on favorite at this point, though there's a ways to go. I don't know too many people that would put a whole lot of money on Jeb Bush, who, still has a great deal of money in his super PAC accounts, but who clearly is just not connecting with Republican voters at all, at least going into the latter stages of the invisible primary.
You know, you live and breathe this stuff every single day. Does that surprise you that at this point it actually seems he's probably further away than he, or as far away as he will be and stay that way?
Yeah, it surprises me a little bit. But on the other hand, I think, from what we know of the internal thinking of Team Jeb when this started out, he really did think that by fundraising alone, he was going to intimidate other candidates into not even running. The so-called shock and awe strategy. It clearly didn't work with the largest Republican field in living memory, and it's sort of as though they weren't quite sure what to do next. And frankly, I would say that Jeb Bush's poor showing doesn't surprise me any more than, say, Scott Walker dropping out early on. But this is just a very strange cycle for Republicans, characterized by, a nominating contest electorate that's in a very perverse mood.
Yeah. That's absolutely. Has Clinton hurt herself on some of the bigger issues for progressives by delaying decisions on the Keystone Pipeline, the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and saying that she's for the death penalty in some cases?
Not really. I mean, her polling numbers among self-identified Democrats, which were really never dipped all that much, even at times when her overall general election favorability was suffering, are now, back up to as strong as they've ever been.
Mm-hmm.
Frankly, the disdain that a lot of progressive activists and elites and opinion leaders have for Hillary Clinton, and frankly have always had for both Clintons, just isn't shared by rank-and-file Democrats in significant numbers. Best we can tell, Bernie Sanders' problem in challenging her is not so much any problem to do with his appeal or his message or his record. It's just that Hillary Clinton is offering another historic candidacy for Democrats, and there just aren't enough Democrats that dislike her to give anybody any real traction.
And a lot of the big negative things, Benghazi and things like this, that almost seems like that's kind of behind us now to an extent. I mean, they came out big against her, but it didn't seem to stick.
We'll see what hundreds of millions of negative ads in a general election do to that and other issues. But no, clearly Democrats don't much care.
Right.
They never much have, and they really tuned out of all the sort of the bogus scandals now. And that was nicely encapsulated by the first debate when Bernie Sanders himself said he was tired of hearing about Hillary Clinton's emails. So unless something new comes up or there's something crazy like an indictment, I do think Democrats really are beyond that.
Mm-hmm. Again, we're speaking with Ed Kilgore, political columnist at New York Magazine, a longtime commentator on progressive politics. So we've got a smaller field with the Democrats. Let's talk about the others. Bernie Sanders, does he have a realistic path to the Democratic nomination?
I don't think so, unless something bad happens to Hillary Clinton. Totally aside from the poll numbers in this or that state at any given moment, the one thing that Bernie Sanders has yet to demonstrate in months of campaigning, and through no fault of his own in his whole career since he's been in the unusual state of Vermont, is any kind of real appeal to minority voters, particularly against someone like Hillary Clinton, who most definitely does have very strong appeal to both Latino and African American voters. Without that, it's really hard to imagine how he would win southern states, Midwestern states, states like California. It's just too narrow a base of support to win the nomination. Now, if something terrible happened to Hillary Clinton, those dynamics might change. But right now, it's just hard for me to understand mechanically. Even if he wins New Hampshire, which is still a strong possibility, how that converts into a completely different and wider base of support in the later states.
Mm-hmm. And in all fairness, there is that third candidate, Martin O'Malley.
Yep.
Does he have a way to stay in play, at least until the convention, perhaps?
I think he'll run out of money long before that. I will say this. I've been watching O'Malley for many years, and I think kind of the humiliation of this campaign is probably just what he needed to temper him as a politician. So I think he's got a real future in national Democratic politics, but it's just the wrong year with the wrong competition.
Is that also a good reason for a guy like O'Malley to get into the race now, though, without any realistic chance of making it, but it gets him out there on the national stage? I mean, is that part of a ploy in a race?
It absolutely doesn't hurt to get to know people in Iowa.
Right, sure, absolutely.
Where he spent an awful lot of time.
Yeah, he has been there a lot.
Those are the sort of things that can pay off later on.
Yeah. What do you make of the Republican race to the right? Is it just early season passion, or has the grand old party gone completely off the rails?
Well, it's the trouble with making these kind of judgments is that we only have presidential elections every 4 years. Frequently there's an incumbent that makes the nominating contest irrelevant. There's just not a huge sample set of these events. So I do not share the feeling of many people, including a lot of political scientists, that, just ignore it all. Nothing to see here, folks. Wait until the day of the Iowa caucuses, and then we'll talk. I think something is going on. It's already driven out one of the early front runners, Scott Walker, significantly damaged another one, Jeb Bush, to where he could not survive very long. I think it's a pretty big deal, and furthermore, it's a continuation of a trend we have seen in the Republican Party now for, certainly the last few years, the years of the Obama administration, and arguably it goes back decades. A never-ending lurch to the right. The sort of the psychosis that some people are seeing in the Republican nominating contest so far largely boils down to conservative voters feeling betrayed because the promises their leaders have made to drive the evil liberals out of power simply have not come true. They're frustrated, they're angry, they don't understand it, and they're feeling increasingly estranged from the rest of the country too. And they want their party to be as loud, abrasive, and as Donald Trump. It's a kind of white identity politics that can become very, very powerful in the echo chamber of the conservative movement in the Republican Party. So it doesn't completely surprise me.
But that extreme right doesn't necessarily represent the bulk of the party, right? I mean, in other words, when you've got somebody like a Donald Trump spouting off what he's spouting off, or Ben Carson, it isn't somebody like a Kasich more central to the party and going to have, wouldn't he, in theory, have better support?
One of the problems you have is that these ideological definitions change over time. The entire field, most especially, definitely including Kasich, would have been considered very, very conservative just a few years ago.
Right.
Yesterday, Jeb Bush was the movement conservative of the Bush family. I could go on and on. Whereas, maybe 30 to 40% of Republican voters self-identify as moderate, that doesn't mean what it used to, number one. And number two, the more ideologically strident voters are more likely to participate, and they have special power in the first state, Iowa, and then in the southern states that are going to come up pretty quickly on the calendar. So, there's a reason for the power of the conservatives in the Republican nominating process, and if you had a candidate like a Mitt Romney who can build up a sizable lead early on and then hang on through until the more moderate states come up in the calendar, that might be something to hope for, but it's just unclear to me who's going to survive that long. The very fact that people are talking about Marco Rubio as the moderate establishment candidate. I mean, here's a guy who was one of the top Tea Party recruits when he was elected to the Senate in 2010, and who, ever since he's flip-flopped on immigration, has barely been able to find a right-wing position that he wasn't willing to take. This is the moderate in the field. That tells you everything you need to know.
Uh-oh. Ed Kilgore, political columnist at New York Magazine, longtime commentator on progressive politics, joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. Ed, thank you so much for your time. Look forward to having you back again soon.
Sure thing.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future to keep this show on the air and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. And now, Bill Press guest host Peter Ogburn and Meredith Shiner chat about the year in politics.
Meredith Shiner joins us in studio. Hi, Meredith.
It's such a burden to be the beauty and the brain of this operation.
I'm telling you.
But I'm going to try my best.
Well, I want to talk about some of the biggest political stories of 2015.
Okay.
Because one of my top three just overall stories is what Donald Trump has done to American politics, and what he's done for himself, and what he's done for future races.
I mean, I think that you make that seem a lot more active. I think that Donald Trump is a reflection of years of work from the Republican Party, I think, to starting back in 2010 with that first Tea Party wave. I think that there were a lot of themes that Republicans ran on nationwide, particularly in these districts that were so entrenched for the Republican Party, whether they were plus 10, plus 8 districts. And I think that, Trump was able to capitalize on those narratives better than anyone, because I think what he really speaks to, I mean, there's the xenophobia element, and
sure,
I can't minimalize that, but I think there's something about the Donald Trump, I'm so successful, I have all this money, if I were president, you would have that money in your pocket too.
Yeah.
And it's not so indifferent from what motivates Bernie Sanders supporters. It's just a different answer to the same problem.
I think that's absolutely
right. And so
right.
I think that there are systemic economic problems that have led to Donald Trump, but I also think that whenever I saw a Republican operative throwing up their arms in the air on Twitter being Donald Trump is ruining all the hard work we made and all the inroads we made with Hispanic voters, you have to ask, well, what work? After the 2012 election, in all of their self-diagnosis reports, they talked about the need to do immigration reform. They talked about the need to make some changes from a policy perspective, to address the kinds of issues that they weren't addressing previously. And at the end of the day, they didn't do that. They didn't bring the bipartisan immigration bill from the Senate onto the floor of the House when they could have. They spoke out significantly during the child migrant crisis. I mean, I think there were a lot of issues where Republicans could have changed their tune and didn't. And again, it's because of the structure of our House of Representatives right now, because I think a lot of those far-right conservative narratives really come out of the House of Representatives because there's so many of those conservative members. I mean, you have 45 to 50 members, core conservative members, who staged a coup of their own leader this year, which I know we'll get to later. But I think that, there were a lot of those elements. And to say that, Donald Trump came out of nowhere, he didn't. I mean, I think that the groundwork was really laid for him, but he does it better than the other guys because there's something so, gloriously anti-establishment about him. What makes watching the debates so entertaining is that he doesn't play by the rules of all of the other suits, right? You have all these guys who have so finely tuned their talking points and who are playing by rules that are just warped up anyway, right? Like, they're not good rules. The rules lead to no substantive debate. They lead to, like, no sort of, like, actual outcome, which is not to say that Trump plays on substance, but he can stand on stage and be like, y'all are bought by everyone else.
Yeah.
So, of course, you're going to say this, that, and the other.
Yeah,
and there's something, like, just fascinating to watch about it, but there are also a lot of problems with it.
I mean, make no mistake. I think that they're like, I understand the Trump thing, right? Like when Ben Carson was sort of having his moment, I didn't get the Ben Carson thing. The Trump thing, I 100% get.
Yeah.
And I think there's been way too much time wasted on talking about how Donald Trump has hijacked the party and Donald Trump has taken over the party. I don't think that
I don't
at all.
think that's true. I mean, also in context, I think that the coverage of him has been disproportionate to his support no matter what. I mean, I think recent polling shows that he is about 11% of the national electorate when you're looking at it. But it's sort of what I tell people, because I feel like whenever I go to different places at RTC, people ask me my opinion on what I think about certain things. Or I'll like go to physical therapy, because I don't break your foot, by the way. I broke my foot in July and I'm still going to physical therapy.
Oh my God.
And my physical therapist will ask me a few things, because there have been times where I've had to duck out like after 20 minutes of appointment and be like, I don't know how to tell you this, but Kevin McCarthy is this guy and he just decided he's not running for speaker, so I've got to
go. Yeah.
It's my life is stupid. You don't want to live it. There was a point to this. Where was I going with this? I got so distracted. When people ask you about Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And I think that, what's the right way to put this? Like, he has the skills of a television star, right? Like, he's very good on camera. He's entertaining. But again, I think that he sort of reflected this overall movement in the Republican Party, and one that has been existential for them, because when you think about it at the most basic level, right? Democrats used to be the party for more government, and Republicans used to be the party for less. It wasn't the party for no government at all. And when you hear some of these Tea Party conservatives talk, particularly in the House, the way that they talk is just completely anti-government. They'll never support a government funding bill. They'll never support a transportation bill. They'll never support anything that involves any baseline engagement of government.
Yeah.
And I think the Republican Party, and we'll see maybe if this plays out in 2016, I don't know if it will, can finally start resolving that question. Because I think 2012 really left an open-ended question.
Yeah.
There are people who looked at Mitt Romney and said he wasn't conservative enough. And there are people who looked at Mitt Romney and said he was too conservative. Mm-hmm. But when you look at the mainstream electorate and the general election electorate, the answer was that he became too conservative through that primary process. Yeah. And I think that there are Republicans who believe that the opposite is true.
That's all for americasdemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Tom Geoghegan, Ed Kilgore, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For americasdemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us, support the show, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate.